Hi, I just wanted to post a quick video about the proper way to mount a scope because from the videos I've seen on YouTube, a lot of them are missing key information and they're also using a lot of expensive tools that you don't need. You don't need a fancy vise to do this. What you need is a level, and that's basically it. Your first step in mounting a scope, obviously, is you need your mounting base. Now this one's proprietary to the rifle, and when you're using a good scope mounting base, whether it's what your rifle manufacturer recommends or it's a quality brand like a Spur or a Geissele, you can basically count on these being level and square. So once you have these torqued to the rifle, which means you've made sure your mating surfaces are clean, these ones have 4 bolts, so you would use a kind of an X pattern, just like you were installing a wheel on a car, and you'll slowly torque them. Make sure all the bolts are in and threaded, and then you'll go back and torque them to spec. The torque specs are different for every rifle for the most part. For this, it's only 18 inch-pounds, which for reference is about 1.5 foot-pounds. They don't have to be very tight. You want them as snug as possible without stripping the threads. You don't need a torque wrench for this if you're experienced with threading bolts. But if you torque it to spec, it's not going to come loose. You don't need Loctite. If you want to use Loctite, use the medium kind. It's blue. Quick, I'm going to show y'all how to just kind of eyeball 20 inch-pounds. This is the tool that most scope kits come with the rings, and these have all been torqued to 20 foot-pounds. So just for reference, that's what it takes to get it loose. I mean, it's as tight as you can really comfortably put torque on this without it digging into your fingers. All right, you're not going overboard, but if it's tight to 20 inch-pounds, and you need to loosen it, it looks about like that. All right. The reason they give you these little 2-inch long Torx keys is because it's really hard to over tighten it. Hopefully you can see my hands training. So you're putting a little bit of muscle into it, but you're not putting leverage on it. You're not forcing it too hard. It's very difficult to over tighten with this little tool. So if you don't have a torque wrench, you can figure it out. It'll be just fine. Anytime you are mounting to a Picatinny rail like this, it's important that when you torque that mount, you're going to put downwards pressure on it as you torque to make sure that these studs are where they're supposed to be in the Picatinny ring, because this is not an exact science. There is, a little bit of tolerance in these Picatinny rails that will allow this to slide back and forth. So when the rifle is enduring recoil, it can knock these loose pretty easy if you're not putting downwards pressure and then torquing your bolt when you initially mount it. Before you worry about leveling anything, after this is installed, you're going to take your scope and place it in your base. Now, you want to make sure this scope is at its maximum magnification. All right, it's a 4:16 power, so I've run it to 16. This is so important because at 16, you're going to have your lowest level of eye relief, and this is going to help you get this scope in the perfect position. So with the scope just sitting in the base, pick it up, be careful, and just close your eyes and get into position and find that position that's most comfortable for you. And when you open your eyes, you're going to see if your scope needs to come backwards or forwards. So you're going to adjust, bring it closer or farther away until you can close your eyes, get in position with a good cheek weld, and open your eyes and see the full picture. And it looks good. All right? Once you figure out where you want your scope, you can mark it with a pencil or something. For me, it's pretty easy because it happens to be right at the forwardmost part of the tube. Now that you've made a mental note of where your scope is going to be positioned in the mount, go ahead and take that off and get your rifle level. Now, maybe your rifle has a flat surface at the bottom and you don't need it, but I like to stick a bipod on there, and using my little wood floor trick, you just kind of rotate it around until it's level. You can use sticky notes or wooden shims or anything to help you with this process. Now I'm going to check across the rings here, make sure that's perfectly level. You can check both rings. You can move it all around, use your sticky notes, stick them underneath here, and once the rifle's level and it's not moving, go ahead and put your scope back in it, the position where you want it. Now you need to make sure the scope is level. Now, you can do this with a level as well. You can measure right across this top turret here and find your level like that. Now you're going to put the top of your scope rings on, and you want to make sure you've got some space right here on either side and that it's about even before you start torquing. When you torque, you're going to use an X pattern, okay, like so. And you're going to do it a little bit at a time. And the whole time you're going to be checking two things. One, the level on your scope. And two, the space between your rings. You want it as even as possible. Now, if you find yourself in this position where you have no gap on one side and a gap on the other and it's getting tight, go ahead and back out your bolts and start again until you get it even. Thing to add is you never want your scope in contact with the barrel of the rifle. You kind of want it as low as possible, depending on your cheek weld and where you find it to be comfortable. But you always want just a small gap in between that rifle. And if you don't have that, then you're going to need to find some different scope mounts, whether it's low profile, medium height, or tall. It's not going to make a big difference in your shooting abilities as long as you're comfortable. So you don't need to fall prey to consumerism and buy some fancy gun vise. During the rifle leveling stage, you can use some heavy textbooks, some dumbbells, anything that'll hold that rifle in place while you mount that scope will work. You don't need to do anything fancy, but you do need to be certain that you maxed out that magnification and got your eye relief set properly, because after you complete your job, if you decide you want to move that scope a ½ inch forward, you're going to have to go back and redo everything all over again. So just make sure you do that right the first time. It's not an exact science. It doesn't need to be 100% perfectly level to 1/1000th of an inch. When you're in the field, you're limited by your own ability to judge whether or not you're holding that rifle level. And if you're using a bipod, you can't trust your bipod. You can't trust the ground you're laying on. You can't trust the backpack that you're on. So, I've used some of the most high dollar bipods in the industry, and you can't count on any of them staying level at all times. So if you want to be absolutely precise, you can get yourself one of these little bubble levels and mount that to your scope in the same manner that you kind of did this process, leveling it to the top turret. And once they're equal, torque it down real well to the scope. So then you'll be able to check before you take the shot on that animal at 600 yards, where it's going to be very important that you are holding it level. Otherwise, your dope's going to be off. You could pull a little bit to the right or left. So, that's what you can do to be 100% on that. Anyways, taxation is theft, fuck the ATF, and happy hunting.